Welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. Take a slow breath. You've come to the right place. What we're entering isn't just a meditation. It's a doorway. Behind it are old stories, passed quietly from teacher to student over bowls of rice, during moonlit walks, or in the hush of temple courtyards. Tonight, that doorway opens for you. Before we cross its threshold, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Sometimes the act of sharing that moment grounds us, reminds us that we are not alone, even in stillness. You don't need to try to relax. Just be. Each story is a kindling flame, warming the cold places inside us, soothing the restless ones, inviting us to remember what it feels like to stop reaching and simply receive. These teachings aren't loud. They come on bare feet. They speak softly, and if you let them in, they change you, not with force, but with presence. Settle in. Lay down the weight of understanding. Let your breath be enough. The first story begins now. A monk walked along a dusty trail, his robe fluttering slightly with each step. The morning air was clear, the sun warm but soft. A few birds called lazily from the treetops, but the monk's brow was furrowed. He had been sent to deliver a letter to a nearby monastery, and he was late. He had misread the schedule, taken the wrong turn, and now walked quickly, heart agitated beneath his robe. Each step struck the earth too hard. Each breath was shallow. His mind raced ahead. Will they think me careless? How could I have made such a mistake? I should have left earlier. What kind of monk forgets the path? Then he heard a voice behind him. Excuse me, Sir Monk. He turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, running up the path barefoot. He held something cupped in his palms. The monk paused. Yes? The boy stopped, panting, and held out his hands. Inside them sat a small, round pebble, no bigger than a thumbprint. It's beautiful, isn't it? The boy said. The monk looked down. It was smooth, flecked with tiny bits of crystal, glinting gently in the light. I found it near the stream, the boy said. It looked lonely. I thought maybe someone should notice. The monk smiled politely. That's kind of you. He began to turn away, but the boy looked up at him and said something that stopped him mid-step. Did you see any of the flowers you passed today? The monk blinked. What? The boy tilted his head. You've walked almost a mile. The path is full of little blue flowers, but your robe is dusty and your eyes are tight. You didn't see any of them, did you? The monk looked down at the pebble again. Then slowly, he sat on a flat rock at the side of the path. The boy grinned and plopped down beside him, offering the pebble again. And the monk, still holding the unopened letter, took it gently in his hand. This is the story of mindfulness in ordinary things. Commentary. In Zen, we often speak of awakening, as though it is some great flash of light or a sudden shift in consciousness. But often, awakening is small, like noticing a flower you've walked past for weeks, or hearing the sound of your own breath after a hard day, or holding a pebble that simply is. The monk had been walking as if his destination were the only thing that mattered. His hurry had made him blind. Not because he lacked wisdom, but because he had left the present moment behind in favor of imagined shame and future apologies. The boy, with no training and no robe, was more awake than he. Not because he had studied sutras, but because he saw what was in front of him, and he shared it. There's a Zen phrase: the miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. The monk delivered the letter later that day, but he took a different path back, slower, softer. He paused to notice the flowers the boy had spoken of, tiny blossoms with indigo petals, scattered like spilled paint across the roadside. He bowed to them, then reached into his robe and touched the small pebble still in his sleeve. After that, he kept it on the windowsill beside his mat, not as a relic, but as a reminder that awareness begins not with enlightenment, but with noticing what's already here. We spend our lives waiting for bigger signs, bigger truths, more impressive moments. But the sacred is everywhere, in the weight of a spoon, the hush of dusk, the rhythm of footsteps, the coolness of a cup before tea is poured. The boy in the story grew up. He never became a monk. But he taught his children to pause, to touch the bark of trees, to look into puddles after rain, to name the colors of the sky at sunset. And his children did the same. Sometimes the greatest teachers do not stand at the front of a hall. They kneel by a stream and lift a stone, so let the pebble teach you. Let it slow you down. Let it whisper. This moment matters too. A house stood at the edge of a quiet village. It wasn't grand. Its roof sagged a little. Its floorboards creaked, but the door was always open, and those who passed by often entered. One day, a traveler knocked. His shoulders were tight with worry, his breath short. He clutched his bag like it held every mistake he'd ever made. The host opened the door and smiled. "Come in," she said gently. "No judgment here, just tea and a place to rest." The next morning the traveller left, but soon another came, this time angry. Fists clenched, jaw locked. The host welcomed him too, showed him to a chair by the fire, listened to him shout, cry, fall silent, then gave him warm bread without asking why he was so upset. They kept coming. Joy danced through the garden one spring afternoon, barefoot and laughing. Grief followed days later, slow, grey, soaking wet from a sudden storm. Loneliness showed up in the middle of the night, shivering. Hope arrived unexpectedly, glowing faintly. Fear sometimes knocked twice in one day. Still, the host opened the door every time. One evening, a boy from the village asked, "Why'd you let them all in, even the scary ones?" The host looked at the boy and said, "Because this house is a guest house, and all emotions are guests. They arrive, they stay, they leave. None of them are me." This story comes from an old Sufi poem by Rumi, beloved also in Buddhist circles. It teaches what meditation often reveals. You are not your emotions. You are the one who notices them, who makes space, who lets them pass through. Anger is not wrong. It is a guest, sometimes loud, sometimes dangerous. But it comes bearing messages, and if you slam the door in its face, it breaks in through the window. Sadness is not weakness. It is a guest. It may rearrange the furniture for a while. It may lie on the couch for days. But eventually, it moves on, especially if you sit beside it instead of pretending it isn't there. Joy too is a guest. And though it's tempting to cling to joy and beg it to stay, Even joy must leave. That's okay. You can welcome it again tomorrow. The problem is not the emotions. The suffering comes when we believe they are permanent, when we build whole identities around them. I am anxious. I am unlovable. I am angry. But you are not those things. You are the house. They are just visitors. There's a story of a monk who struggled with anxiety. He tried to push it away, ignore it, meditate it into silence. Nothing worked. Until one day, his teacher said, "Stop fighting the visitor. Invite it in, serve it tea, ask it why it came." The next time anxiety returned, the monk didn't resist. He noticed his breath tightening, his chest constricting. And he whispered, "Welcome, you're here again." He didn't like it, but he didn't hate it either. He watched it, listened to it, sat with it, and slowly it softened, and eventually it left. This is what it means to live as a guest house, to offer your presence, your kindness, your non-attachment to whatever arises. It does not mean you let the guests destroy the house. It means you don't mistake them for permanent residents. You set boundaries, but not walls. You show compassion, not control. You practice presence, not possession. Sometimes guests arrive unannounced. Sometimes they slam the door. Sometimes they cry in the middle of the night. That's okay. You breathe. You listen. You stay grounded in the structure of the house. The breath, the body, the awareness that is always home. Commentary. The guest house reminds us of the temporary nature of all emotions. Nothing stays forever, no matter how intense. And by opening the door instead of guarding it with fear or shame, we reclaim something powerful. Agency. Because when you welcome a feeling, you stop being its prisoner. To be the host is not to be passive. It is to be strong, grounded, compassionate enough to say, "This too belongs, but it will not stay forever, and it is not who I am." You are not broken for feeling grief. You are not failing because fear has returned. You are not weak for missing someone. You are alive, and the guest house of aliveness is open to all visitors, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. When you practice this kind of welcoming, something beautiful happens. You stop judging others for their emotions too. You recognize their guests. You become safer, more compassionate, more real, because you've sat with your own visitors. And you know what it means to offer space. So tonight, when something arrives, a pang in your chest, a wave of sadness, a flicker of joy, pause, breathe, and ask gently, "What do you need? You're welcome here. For now." Then let it pass, let it teach you, let it leave, and return to silence. There was once a young monk who feared change. He feared the end of things, the falling of leaves, the fading of youth, the loss of voices he loved. Every impermanence felt like a theft. And though he studied the teachings, sat each morning in silence, recited the truths of Anicca, still, his heart gripped what it knew. One day, he sat with his teacher beneath the open sky. The wind was gentle. The air smelled of dry grass and pine. Above them, clouds drifted, vast and slow, casting soft shadows across the stone. The teacher pointed upward and said, "Look, what do you see?" The monk replied, "A cloud." The teacher nodded. Now keep watching. They sat for a long while. Minutes passed. Then hours. The cloud changed shape. Then shape again. Then thinned and vanished. The monk frowned. It's gone. The teacher smiled. Number only its shape is gone. Its water is still in the sky, or falling as rain, or becoming mist. It hasn't ended, only transformed. The monk was silent, and something inside him softened. This is the story of impermanence, and the truth that beyond all change, there is a space that never breaks. Commentary. We fear change because we identify with form. We think, I am this body. I am this name. I am this role, this relationship, this belief. And when those dissolve, we feel ourselves dissolve. But the Buddha taught, all compounded things are impermanent. All form changes, but emptiness remains. Emptiness is not void. It is spaciousness, the sky that holds all clouds without being touched by them. The nature of mind is like that. Thoughts arise like weather, bright, stormy, dense, scattered, but the awareness that sees them, it remains untouched, unshaken, vast. When you cry, the sky is not wet. When you laugh, the sky does not echo. And when the self seems to break apart, the sky simply watches. The young monk began to observe things differently. When a flower wilted, he did not mourn its death. He saw its petals return to soil, its stem feed the ants, its color fade into memory. He saw its life ripple onward. He came to understand that nothing truly ends. The cloud becomes rain, the rain becomes river, the river becomes mist, the mist becomes cloud again. So too with us. What we call a self is a cloud, shifting, dancing, dissolving, but never disappearing. And behind it all, the sky waits, not as a place, but as a metaphor for mind, open, unchanging, whole. This is why the Buddha smiled when asked, "What happens after death?" He did not rush to answer, because the question clings to form, and the truth cannot be grasped like a stone. It can only be realized. Like seeing the sky for the first time after years of watching only clouds. The monk later wrote, "My thoughts are not me. My name is not me. I am the space between all that comes and goes." This is not to say life has no meaning. On the contrary, its beauty lies in its movement. Because clouds are only beautiful because they change, and love is precious because it cannot be frozen. So when you feel yourself clinging to a moment, to a face, to a version of yourself long gone, pause, look up, and remember, you are the sky. Everything else is passing weather. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In one hand, he carries a book, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom. In the other, he wields a sword, long, luminous, and aflame with clarity. He rides a lion, not to show power, but to symbolize the fearlessness of insight. This is Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, where Avalokiteshvara brings compassion, where Samantabhadra brings vow and action, Manjushri brings the sharp, radiant truth. His name means gentle glory. But his wisdom is not soft. It does not comfort. It cuts. It slices through illusion with the precision of a blade honed on silence. The sword he carries is not for battle. It is for discernment. It separates appearance from reality, self from no self, thought from knowing. It reveals what we are too afraid to see and too free not to see. In the old sutras, it is said that Manjushri's wisdom is so sharp, he was enlightened before the Buddhas of the past. He is the eternal teenager of the Mahayana pantheon, ever young, ever clear, ever unburdened by delusion. Where others hesitate, Manjushri speaks. Where others follow rules, Manjushri asks why. Where others cling to views, Manjushri lets go, again and again and again. One day a monk asked him, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" And Manjushri drew his sword in the air, then lowered it slowly, as if slicing through something invisible. That was his answer. Because words can't always hold wisdom. Sometimes it must be shown. In Zen temples, the figure of Manjushri is often placed behind the Roshi's seat, not as decoration, but as a reminder that true teaching must be rooted in clarity, that every word spoken should come from a place that has already cut through ego, opinion, attachment. The teacher, like Manjushri, must see clearly before they speak. There is a famous koan. A young monk full of doctrine said to the master, "I've memorized the Heart Sutra. I understand emptiness. There is no I, no ear, no mind, no path, no attainment." The master pointed to a bowl of rice and said, "Then eat, because understanding is not the point. Living is." This is what Manjushri teaches, wisdom that is not locked in scriptures, but embodied, applied, lived. The sword is not aggressive, it is necessary to wake us, to free us, to carve away the clinging and the confusion until only truth remains, not an idea, but a mirror with no dust. There's a story told in the mountains. A disciple sat meditating, trying to silence his thoughts. He came to Manjushri in prayer and asked, "Please cut away my illusions." That night, in a dream, Manjushri appeared. He said nothing, only lifted his sword and placed it gently on the disciple's shoulder, not to strike, but to remind him, the blade is not outside you. It is within. Commentary. Manjushri does not give you answers. He gives you the means to see for yourself. That is his wisdom, not dogma, but discernment. Not belief, but perception stripped of filter. The sword cuts two ways. It cuts through ignorance, but also through comfort. It forces us to ask, what have I built my life on? And what happens when that is no longer solid? Can I let go? Can I breathe? Even when the ground beneath me vanishes. Wisdom is not knowing more. It is needing less. It is silence that doesn't need applause. It is clarity that does not waver in the dark. It is the ability to sit in confusion and not flinch, to stand before illusion and not bow, to name what is and let go of what is not. The lion Manjushri rides is not a beast of war. It is the mind that has been tamed. The roar is no longer fear. It is the roar of reality unfiltered. the courage to face things as they are. There's a quiet danger in spiritual life. We want wisdom to feel good, to validate us, to comfort the parts of us that ache. But Manjushri reminds us, true wisdom will sometimes hurt. It will dismantle the story we've told ourselves. It will whisper, "You are not who you think you are." And if we listen, the story ends and life begins. In your own practice, the sword appears in many forms. The question you can't answer. The moment you realize you've been wrong. The teacher who looks you in the eye and says nothing because anything they say would only get in the way. That is the sword, cutting gently, so you can see clearly. You don't have to fear it. You have to wield it in kindness, in honesty, in the decision to no longer live half asleep. When you chant, chant with the sword. When you bow, bow with the sword. When you love, love with the sword. Not to harm, but to see clearly what love is. Because love without wisdom is sentiment, and wisdom without love is cold. But together, they are Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara, and the path itself. It moved like time dash dash, patient, steady, clear. She had come to the water for answers, not about rituals, not about chanting, but about something deeper. Who am I? She had read sutras, memorized verses, and bowed each morning, but still, a knot remained in her chest. The old teacher, sensing her restlessness, came to sit beside her. They watched the water in silence for a while. Then he pointed to a single droplet clinging to a leaf above the current. It trembled. Round, whole, complete. "Is that a drop of water?" the master asked. She nodded. "Yes," he smiled. Then a breeze blew. The droplet fell and joined the river below. The master turned again. "Now tell me, where is the drop?" This is the story of non-self, of how the self we cling to is like a drop, never separate, never alone. Commentary. We walk through life asking, who am I? What is me? Where do I go when I die? But these questions are like trying to bottle the river. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. The Buddha taught that what we call a self is not fixed. No eternal soul, no unchanging core, only process, only flow, body, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These five aggregates arise and pass like waves. There is no boat, only current. The novice sat with this for many days. She stared at her reflection in the water, noticing how it changed when the wind blew, how it vanished when a stone was thrown, how it returned when the ripples faded. Was the reflection real? Yes. Was it solid? So too with the self. We exist, but not as a thing, as a movement, a flame, not a statue, a song, not a stone. One night the novice had a dream. She stood before a vast river. She cupped water in her hands, holding it close, but it began to spill, to slip between her fingers, to return to the source. In the dream, she let it go and wept, not from sadness, but relief, because in letting go of the drop, she felt the whole river. When she woke, she wrote a single line in her journal. "I am not a drop in the river, I am the river in a drop." This is the heart of rebirth too. not the soul traveling from body to body, but conditions unfolding, like water taking many forms: cloud, rain, stream, mist, but always water. You are not this name, not this face, not even this mind. You are this moment, arising from countless causes and dissolving into new ones. When the master was old and dying, the novice, now a teacher, sat by his side. She asked him if he was afraid. He smiled faintly and said, "A drop returns to the river. How can it fear?" Then he closed his eyes and was gone. But the river kept flowing. So the next time you feel small or lost or alone, remember the drop and the river it was never truly apart from. In a small temple nestled between pine trees and fog, there burned a single candle. It was placed each morning in the center of the meditation hall. No glass shield, no tool holder, just a quiet flame in a shallow dish. It flickered gently as monks came and went. It was not large, not dazzling, but it was always there. Software steady, alive. One morning, a gust of wind swept through the open window. The flame bent low, danced wildly, then steadied, then bent again. A novice sitting nearby grew anxious. He reached to close the window, but the old teacher touched his arm and whispered, "Wait, let it breathe." The flame, though small, did not go out. It fluttered, dimmed, but held on. The room stayed still, and after a few moments the wind passed. The candle straightened, its glow calm once more. The teacher turned to the novice and said, "This is your mind. This is your breath. This is your life." A candle by nature is vulnerable. One sharp breath, and it's gone. One careless movement, and it's lost. But that fragility is also its power, because the candle doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't fight to stay lit. It simply responds, bows, sways, returns. In Buddhism, the flame is often used as a metaphor for consciousness, flickering, ever-changing, not a solid thing, but a process, a dance between wick, wax, and air. Your thoughts are like the flame, your body, the wick, your breath, the air that sustains it, and the wind. That's life. The candle cannot control the wind, but it learns to dance with it. And that is the teaching. The novice asked, "But what if the flame goes out?" The teacher smiled. "Then we light it again, and again, and again. This is the practice. You will lose your calm. You will be shaken. Your light will dim, but the wick is still there. The wax remains. You are never without the capacity to be rekindled. There is a Tibetan saying, 'Better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness.' But even deeper is this. Learn to trust the candle even when the wind rises." In the days that followed, the novice watched the flame more closely. He began to notice how it moved, how it bent without fear, how it never clung to its shape from a moment before. And one morning, during Zazen, as a storm passed outside, he did not flinch. He simply watched the flame bend and return. And in that moment, something in him softened too. This is what meditation teaches, not how to still the wind, but how to let the flame bend without going out, how to meet life's changes with grace, how to stop fearing your own flicker, Grief is a wind, so is joy, so is anger, so is love. You cannot block the breeze without also losing the air you need to burn. You must stay open, even when it stings. Especially then, commentary, The Candle and the Wind is not a story about fragility alone. It's about resilience without resistance. It's about remaining warm, soft, and lit, even when the conditions shift. Even when nothing stays steady but your own willingness to begin again. We often think strength looks like staying the same. But sometimes strength is in swaying, in letting go, in trusting that the flame inside you is not so easily put out. You do not need to burn like a bonfire. You only need to glow enough to see your next step, to offer light to the person beside you, to remind the darkness, I am still here. The teacher once said, "A candle gives all it has, and still the world is warmed by its passing. So be the candle. Even if your light flickers, even if no one sees, even if the wind blows harder tomorrow, burn anyway, not for show, but because this is who you are." As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. The scholar arrived at the mountain temple with a scroll under one arm and confidence in his step. He had studied the texts. He had debated sutras with masters across the provinces. He had published writings on logic and perception, emptiness and form. And now, at last, he wished to learn Zen. He was met by the abbot, an old man with tired eyes and steady hands. They sat on floor cushions beneath a wooden beam. The room smelled of old cedar and rain-damp stone. Outside, the wind stirred the pine needles. The abbot said nothing. The scholar bowed. "I have come to learn the true meaning of Zen." The abbot smiled and reached for the teapot. He poured and kept pouring. The cup filled, then overflowed. The tea spilled onto the tray, then the floor, pooling around the scholar's sleeve. "Master!" the scholar cried, pulling back. "The cup is full. No more will go in." The abbot paused, then looked up, expression unchanged. "Exactly," he said. "If your cup is already full, how can I show you Zen?" That was the lesson. No parable, no verse, no philosophy, just tea and the quiet sound of too much. In Zen, this story is often the first told, because so many who come to the practice do so with answers already in hand. Certainties, systems, names for things that have no names. But Zen is not a path of addition. It is a path of subtraction, not filling up, but emptying out, so that what cannot be spoken can finally be seen. Later that evening, the scholar sat alone in the courtyard. The wind had shifted. The trees swayed like old dancers in the dark. He touched the wet sleeve of his robe, still stained from the spilled tea. He thought of how much effort he had made, years of memorizing, comparing, analyzing. And now, a cup of tea had undone him. The next morning, he returned to the abbot. He bowed deeper this time. "I will begin again," he said, "but this time, I will begin with an empty cup." The abbot simply nodded and poured. In the West, we're taught to value accumulation, of knowledge, of opinions, of success. We believe wisdom is something gained, a kind of mental wealth, stacked neatly in rows. But in Zen, true seeing begins only when the shelves collapse, when we stop trying to name the wind and instead feel it on our skin. The story of the teacup is not just about humility, it's about presence, because most of us don't realize how full we are, not with wisdom, but with noise. Thoughts, fears, comparisons, labels for ourselves, judgments of others. Memories clinging like moss to the walls of the mind, and into that already crowded room, we try to invite truth. But truth is shy. It doesn't enter noise. It waits for silence. Once, a monk asked his teacher, "What is the essence of Zen?" The teacher picked up a broom and began sweeping, not as metaphor, but as truth. The monk blinked. "I meant the true essence." The teacher stopped, held up the broom, and said, "When your cup is empty enough to see this, then you'll know." The scholar stayed at the temple. He chopped wood, carried water, swept the garden path. He stopped trying to explain Zen and began living it. When thoughts rose, he bowed to them like old friends. When the wind blew, he listened. He stopped speaking about emptiness in essays and began to taste it in his bones. One afternoon, while washing bowls, another visitor arrived, a young academic from the capital, eager, brilliant, hungry for answers. He asked the abbot, "Master, what is Zen?" The abbot reached for the teapot. The scholar, now older and humbler, smiled gently and whispered under his breath, "Careful, your cup is already full." Commentary. We often think that wisdom means knowing more. But in Zen, wisdom is the art of unknowing, not ignorance, but freedom from the clutter of should and must, from the heavy robes of "I already know." To be empty is not to be void, it is to be receptive, to hold space for what arises, without grabbing it, without turning it into a theory. A teacup holds tea because it is empty. A mind holds peace because it is still. You cannot pour into what is already overflowing. You cannot meet truth if you are busy rehearsing your opinions. Zen is not an addition to your bookshelf. It is the moment you set the bookshelf on fire and warm your hands by the flames. There is a cup in all of us. Sometimes it's filled with pride, sometimes with fear, sometimes with knowledge we mistake for awakening. But when you're ready, when you truly long for clarity, you will tip that cup, let it spill, and then, and only then, will the tea of the present moment finally be poured. She never meant harm. She only passed on what she heard. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there, a half-finished sentence passed along like a secret prayer. Her name was Sister Nima, young, lively, kind mostly, but her words moved quickly and quietly unraveled the thread of trust inside the temple. At first it was small. She meditates longer when people are watching. They say the head cook isn't really vegetarian. I heard the abbot used to be married. No malice, just conversation, just sharing. But soon, monks began to turn away from each other in the corridor. Silent meals grew tenser. Chanting lost its rhythm. Smiles stiffened at the edges. No one named the cause, but it lingered, like smoke with no fire. One afternoon, the abbot asked Sister Nima to join him in the garden. The plum trees were beginning to blossom, delicate petals stirring in the breeze. He held a small bag in his hand. "Walk with me," he said gently. They walked in silence down the path that circled the temple grounds. After a while, he opened the bag and began to scatter chicken feathers along the way. Sister Nima tilted her head. "Why are you doing that?" The abbot didn't answer. When they returned to the garden, he handed her the empty bag. "Now," he said, "go and collect them all." She blinked. "But the wind's taken them. They're scattered everywhere." He looked at her and said softly, "So too with your words." That night she wept. This is the story of speech and consequence, of how sound can build or destroy. Commentary. In Buddhist practice, right speech is one of the Eightfold Path's pillars. It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest, because words don't vanish when we stop speaking. They ripple, they stain, they take root in someone else's mind, sometimes forever. Sister Nima did not speak with cruelty, but neither did she speak with care. And in that space, in the absence of intention, harm took hold. We often forget how powerful language is. A word can lift someone from despair or push them over the edge. It can invite reflection or ignite shame. Words are not just air. They are actions. They build worlds. There's a Zen saying, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." Sister Nima filled silence with curiosity, suspicion, drama, and the silence grew quieter, but colder, until no one trusted what they didn't hear. The Buddha once said, "A person is not wise because they speak much. A person is wise when they speak what is true and what causes no harm." That is the gate of right speech. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If it fails even one, it's better to let it drift away like a feather on the wind. After that night, Sister Nima changed. She stopped repeating what others said. She listened more, spoke less. When she did speak, her words came slowly, like water poured from a clean bowl. The monks began to look at her differently, not because she had become wise overnight, but because she was watching herself now, watching what she left behind in others when she spoke. And over time, trust returned to the temple. Not because of a sermon, not because of a rule, but because one person saw the feathers scatter and chose to stop scattering more. So speak with care. Speak like you're building something with your breath. Because you are. Every sentence is a seed, and whether it blooms or bruises is up to you. A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar, but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveler had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness, a wave, is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line, emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren. It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless, but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveler looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow, all temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. You don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveler reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there. And you will return to it, not lost, but home. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. The monsoon rains had passed, and the forest paths of Kosambi steamed with quiet life. Leaves dripped with silver beads. Frogs croaked low from the shadows. And above it all, the scent of wet bark and jasmine lingered like breath held too long. Under a canopy of tall sal trees, the Buddha sat surrounded by monks. They had walked for days to gather here. Some were old, most were young, their robes still crisp from devotion, their minds still sharp with questions. And today, the Blessed One had agreed to speak, not of morality, nor of meditation, but of something far subtler, of misunderstanding. He began, not with pronouncement, but with silence. Then, as the breeze shifted through the trees, he spoke. There are those, he said, who come to the Dharma, like a man searching for a serpent. A few monks glanced up. Serpents were no small matter in these woods, slender and swift, some deadly, some divine. This man, the Buddha continued, is told that a snake dwells near the roots of a great tree, so he goes into the forest to catch it. But he does not learn the proper way. He does not bring a forked stick. He does not wait for the right moment. He sees movement in the grass and lunges with bare hands. A few younger monks leaned forward. What happens? One whispered. The Buddha's gaze passed over them like moonlight on water. He seizes the snake by the tail. A ripple of discomfort passed through the listeners. And the snake, he said, twists and strikes. He paused. And so it is with those who take hold of the Dharma wrongly, grasping at the tail, not understanding the nature of what they hold. And when it turns against them, they blame the teaching, never seeing that it was their own hand that erred. Silence fell again. It was not a parable to soothe, but to stir. For many in that circle had studied hard, memorized discourses, debated with pride. They recited verses in the marketplace, corrected others in the villages, and took satisfaction in knowing the words of the Buddha by heart. But the words were not the snake, and the Buddha knew it. A senior monk, Kakana, bowed his head and asked softly, "Blessed One, how does one hold the Dharma correctly?" The Buddha nodded. Imagine, he said, a man crossing a river. The current is swift, the far bank promises safety, and he finds no boat, no bridge, so he gathers branches, grass and reeds. He binds them tightly. He makes a raft. The monks followed, some nodding. With effort, he crosses the water. And when he reaches the other shore, does he carry the raft on his back for the rest of the journey? A few smiled. A few looked unsure. No, said the Buddha. He leaves it behind, grateful, respectful, but he does not cling to it. He let that image hang in the warm, moist air. So too is the Dharma, he said. A raft to cross, not a burden to bear forever, not a weapon to strike others, not a badge to wear. A soft murmur of recognition passed through the monks. But some, he continued, treat the Dharma as the man who grabs the snake's tail. They take hold of words, of verses, of rules, not to cross the river, but to shout from the shore. He turned his palm upward. They say, I know, you do not. They say, this is the only way, yours is wrong. They say, I have read, I have memorized, I have mastered. He paused. But what have they understood? A breeze stirred the forest floor. A leaf spiraled down like a question with no answer. Understanding, he said, is not repetition. Wisdom is not memorization, and truth is not a prize to be clutched. He looked at them all. Do not seize the tail. Learn how the snake moves. Watch, be still, approach with care. Grasp rightly, not to own, but to understand. A young novice, no older than 15, raised his hand timidly. But blessed one, he said, what if one clings to the raft out of reverence, out of gratitude? The Buddha smiled gently. Reverence is not the same as attachment, he said. Gratitude flows like a river. Clinging dams the stream. He folded his hands in his lap. To let go does not mean to forget. It means to honor the purpose and move on when it has been fulfilled. Several monks bowed. Some looked thoughtful, others uneasy, for the teaching had pierced the pride of many. A monk named Sati, known for his keen memory and rigid interpretations, frowned. But Lord, he said, should we not defend the Dharma from false views? Yes, said the Buddha without hesitation. But first, defend it from misunderstanding within yourself. A man who argues from ego may win the debate and lose the path. He looked directly at Sati. If you know a verse, but use it to shame another, you have caught the tail. He turned to the group once more. If you teach to elevate yourself, you have caught the tail. If you study only to be praised, you have caught the tail. If you hold to rules to feel superior, you have caught the tail. And if you mistake knowledge for wisdom, you have caught the tail. The forest was utterly still now. Even the birds had quieted. And when the snake turns and bites, the Buddha asked, you will say the Dharma is false, that it failed you, that it was sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake was never to blame. A few monks bowed their heads in shame. One of the older mendicants, seated on a mat of grass near the front, exhaled deeply. I have clutched many tails in my time, he said, but now I wish only to learn how to see clearly. The Buddha nodded. That is the beginning of wisdom. That evening, as twilight turned the forest gold, the monks moved quietly through the camp. No chants, no debates, just footsteps and thought. Sati sat alone by the fire, his manuscript scrolls untouched. The novice who had asked about the raft sat beside him, quiet, respectful. Sati turned and whispered, I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise. The boy looked at him. And now? Sati stared at the flames. Now I wonder if I even know how to listen. In the stillness of the forest, the words of the Buddha echoed like a distant bell. Do not grasp the tail. learn how the snake moves. And in the hearts of those who truly listened, the Dharma shed its scales of pride, of certainty, of rigid form, and began, at last, to breathe. The gates of Kapilavastu had not changed. They still stood tall and carved with symbols of victory, still flanked by soldiers in polished armor, still framed by the scent of sandalwood and rose water poured in offering. But the man walking toward them now was not the same prince who once slipped away into the dark, his silks folded neatly beside a sleeping child. He wore no crown, no jewelry, only the ochre robes of a wandering monk, faded by sun and softened by dust. His feet were bare, his hands folded around a simple begging bowl. And though the guards stiffened at the sight of him, there was something in his stillness, his presence, that made them hesitate. "Is that?" one whispered. But the other could not answer, for it had been nearly 7 years since Prince Siddhartha vanished into the forest. 7 years since the kingdom was draped in grief and silence, since King Suddhodana walked the palace gardens alone, since Yasodhara raised their son Rahula beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Now the prince had returned, but not as a prince, not even as a man of the world. He returned as the Buddha, the awakened one. The message reached the palace like a whisper carried on wind. He has returned. In the great hall, King Suddhodana stood without speaking for a long time. Then, with deliberate steps, he left his throne. No guards followed him, no procession was summoned. He walked alone down the long stone corridor, past the memories carved into every wall. He found Siddhartha standing beneath the Bodhi tree that had been planted in the garden long ago. It was not the Bodhi tree, but it cast the same kind of peace, broad shade, dappled light, and the hush of old leaves. Father and son faced each other, one with hair white as ash and eyes heavy with time, the other with a shaven head and a face so calm it made the air feel still. "You left without a word," the king said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I had no words," the Buddha replied, "only the question. And now you return with answers. I return with understanding. Not to rule, but to teach. Not to reclaim, but to share." The king looked at him long and deeply, as if trying to trace the child he once cradled, the young man who rode out in golden chariots, the son who vanished like a dream before dawn. At last, the king nodded. "Then let your mother see you, and let the boy." Yasodhara did not run to meet him. She did not cry. She did not fall to her knees. She stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, her sari plain, her hair pulled back, her face worn not with age, but with waiting. "I knew," she said quietly, "I knew you had not died." The Buddha lowered his gaze. "I died to what I was," he said, "so that I could be born to what is." "And us?" she asked. "What are we now?" He stepped closer but did not reach out. The rules of a renunciant were clear. No touch, no home, no possession, and yet his eyes held something that made her breath catch. An ache, a reverence, a peace deeper than comfort. "I carry you with me," he said, "not in desire, but in truth. In knowing that even love must be freed from clinging to shine in full." Behind her, a boy's voice echoed through the hall. "Mother, who is it?" Rahula stepped into the light. He was 7, just tall enough to look up with question. just old enough to sense what was unspoken. His eyes, so like his father's, widened as he saw the man in robes. He looked at his mother, then back at the man. "Is this?" Yasodhara nodded slowly. "This is your father." The boy approached carefully, drawn not by familiarity but by gravity. The Buddha knelt, bringing his eyes level with the child's. Rahula looked at the robes, at the bowl, at the bare feet, dusty and calloused. "You are a king," the boy said. "I was," the Buddha replied, "but everyone says you will always be a king. I have chosen another path." "Why?" The Buddha did not speak right away. Instead, he looked at Rahula, not with the eyes of a father returning, but with the gaze of one who sees the seeds of suffering in even the smallest questions. "To be a king is to protect borders," he said. "But the greatest kingdom is not land, it is the mind. I left to master that realm, and to help others do the same." Rahula stared at him, then reached out, tentatively, silently, and touched the bowl in his father's hands. "Are you hungry?" "I eat only what is given freely." The boy blinked. "I'll give." The next morning, as sunlight touched the eastern gate, the people of Kapilavastu gathered in the streets. They had heard. They had whispered. Some had doubted. Others had hoped. Now they saw. The Buddha walked barefoot through the city with his disciples behind him, his bowl held gently, his eyes neither lifted in pride nor lowered in shame. Just present. And beside him, a small boy walked, his steps careful, his face solemn. "Who is that?" people whispered. "That is his son," someone said. "That is Rahula." When the procession reached the palace gates again, Rahula turned to his mother. "I want to go with him," he said. Yasodhara's heart trembled. "You are still young," she whispered. "You have not seen the world." "But I have seen him," Rahula said, "and he is the world." She knelt and held his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, and let him go, not out of abandonment, but out of trust. Rahula turned to his father. "Teach me." That night, under a canopy of stars, the Buddha gave his son the precepts. A child novice, a seeker born not of blood, but of choice. He named him Rahula, not in casual use, but in truth. Fetter. For that is what the boy had been once, a golden chain pulling at his heart. But now the chain had turned to light. Not attachment, but connection. Not weight, but legacy. The Buddha looked at his son as he slept beside the fire, curled in a robe too big, holding a wooden begging bowl like a treasure. And for a moment, the silence was not empty. It was full. Years later, Rahula would become a monk in full, respected for his insight and restraint. He would ask deep questions and receive answers not as a prince's son, but as a seeker in his own right. But none would forget that first night. When the Buddha returned, not with chariots, but with calm, not to rule, but to gaze into his son's eyes, and say, without speaking, "I left so you would not inherit illusion. I returned so you could choose the truth." And in that silent gaze was everything a father could offer and everything a seeker could need. There was once a dog who barked at everything, leaves in the wind, a child's laughter, the moon. He lived near the edge of a monastery in the countryside. A dusty patch of land behind the kitchen, where scraps were tossed and shadows flickered on old stone walls. The monks called him Naga. No one knew where he came from. He was just always there, tail curled, eyes sharp, teeth ready, and always barking. When visitors arrived, he barked. When bells rang, he barked. Even when nothing moved at all, he barked, as if the world itself was suspicious. Some monks avoided him. Too wild, they muttered. Others threw him bread or whispered mantras for his restless soul. But one monk, elderly, slow-moving, soft-spoken, began to sit near him each morning. No words, no food, just presence. He would settle into the grass, cross-legged, a few paces from Naga's resting place. He didn't reach for him, didn't scold the barking. He just sat. At first, Naga barked at him too, low growls, sharp yelps, but the monk remained still, breathing in, breathing out, no threat, no fear, no reaction. Days passed, then weeks. Naga still barked at others, still snarled at passing carts or fluttering robes, but not at the old monk. Eventually, when the monk arrived, Naga would simply lift his head and then rest it again. One morning, the monk placed a small bowl of water nearby. Naga didn't touch it, not for an hour, but as the sun climbed, he finally approached, drank, then sat beside the bowl. The monk said nothing, only smiled. A younger monk watching from the corridor asked later, "Master, how did you calm him? We've tried so many things, food, scolding, chants." The old monk replied, "He barked because the world barked back. He expected resistance, but when he found none, he started listening." Reactivity, the monk would later teach, is like a match near dry grass. One spark, and the fire spreads. But if the grass is damp, soft, grounded, the flame fizzles out. Naga still barked sometimes, but not with the same edge, not with the same fear. And when the old monk passed away years later, Naga lay beside his meditation cushion for 3 days, silent, not whimpering, not barking, just there. Monks and novices alike noticed. A dog who once barked at everything, now holding space for grief, with the stillness of a cloud. There is a saying, when you stop reacting, you start seeing. The dog had seen the one thing no command could teach, that peace isn't taught through force, but through presence that does not flinch. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. The sun rose slowly over the wide green fields, brushing the tops of the grass with gold. Mist drifted over the earth like breath from a dreaming world. And in a quiet corner of the meadow, where the stalks grew thick and the wind passed gently, lived a flock of quail. They were small birds, light-boned and quick, their feathers dappled like earth and sunlight. They lived simply, eating seeds, singing softly, and moving together like a single thought. And among them was one who saw more than the others, who watched not only the sky and the grass, but the patterns within them. He was the Buddha in a past life, and though he had no title or special perch, the others came to trust him, because he noticed what they missed, and he saw what was coming. Each day, the flock flew out into the fields to feed. Each day they returned, wings beating as one, hearts light. But one morning, as the sun rose pale behind thin clouds, the wise quail called the others close. "There is danger coming," he said. The flock stilled. "A fowler is near. He lays traps in the tall grass. If we are not careful, we will be taken." Some of the younger birds flapped their wings in alarm. "Should we stop flying?" asked one. "No," said the wise quail, "but we must act together." He showed them a plan. "If one is caught in the net," he said, "do not panic. Each of us must place our beaks beneath the net. At the same moment, we will lift and fly." "To freedom?" a small chick asked. He nodded. "Yes, together." The flock agreed, and the very next day, the net came. It was hidden beneath the dew-wet grass. A few birds landed without seeing it. With a sudden pull, the fowler sprang the trap. Wings fluttered, cries rang out. But the wise quail shouted, "Now!" as we practiced. The others rushed in, beaks down, wings strong. And together they rose, the net lifted with them, light as silk on the wind. And just beyond the trees, they dropped it, free once more. The fowler, watching from behind a tree, blinked. "Strange," he muttered. "I've never seen birds do that." He returned the next day, and again the next. Each time the net was lifted. Each time the birds escaped. He grew frustrated. "Clever little things," he muttered. "But they won't always be united." And he was right, because fear does not break the flock, but ego can. One morning, two young quail quarreled. "You always land too close," snapped one. "You always peck too fast," the other retorted. Their voices rose. The others turned away, uncomfortable. The wise quail approached them gently. "Remember," he said, "the net does not care who is right, only who is divided." But pride had taken root. The quarrel continued. And the next day, when the net fell again, something changed. The two angry quail were caught. The others flew in, ready to help. "Lift with us," they called. But the two snapped at each other. "You grab that side!" "No, you're too slow." Their beaks tangled, their wings struck each other, and in the confusion, the net stayed down. The fowler emerged from the trees, and that day, not all escaped. The survivors gathered in silence beneath a low fig tree. Even the wind was still. The wise quail spoke, not in anger, but with sorrow. "Together we can lift what traps us, but alone, even a feather becomes too heavy." In time, the flock mended. The young quail apologized, and the net, though dangerous, was never as strong as their unity. The fowler eventually gave up and moved on, and the wise quail remained, never seeking attention, never blaming, but always watching, always reminding them it is not the trap that captures us. It is forgetting that we are stronger together. In quiet monasteries, monks would later chant this story beneath swaying trees. They would bow not to the birds, but to the truth they carried. That unity is not just comfort, it is survival. Because in this world, nets will fall, but if we move with one breath, with one purpose, with one heart. Even the strongest snare cannot hold us. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree, its roots like arms cradling the earth, its leaves trembling in the hush before dawn. Siddhartha was still, not because he had nothing left to do, but because he had found the one thing worth doing. The grass beneath him held the warmth of day's memory. The river nearby whispered its ancient lullaby. Above, stars thinned into morning. And within him, the silence grew deep. He had made his vow to remain unmoved until he had reached the end of suffering. And so he breathed, in, outside. The body sat like a mountain. The mind watched like the sky. But truth, before it flowers, is always tested, and so came Mara. Mara, the tempter, the king of illusion, the force of resistance in all beings who inch toward awakening. He did not come in one form, but many, not with a single sword, but with 1,000 voices. First, Mara sent desire. His daughters appeared, radiant and swaying. Their forms shimmered with beauty. Their voices sang sweet lullabies of longing and delight. They danced before the still figure under the tree, their laughter like bells. But Siddhartha did not stir. Their beauty held no hook. His gaze did not linger. He saw not bodies, but masks, not pleasure, but impermanence. Desire passed like perfume on the wind. Then Mara sent fear. The sky darkened, thunder cracked, demons emerged from shadows, fangs bared, eyes aflame, weapons of fire and bone in hand. They rushed the tree, screamed into Siddhartha's ears, hurled spears of doubt and arrows of terror. But Siddhartha did not flinch. The weapons turned to lotus petals as they neared him. The demons screamed, but their voices died in the vast silence that surrounded him. Fear had no place where nothing was clung to. Next came pride. Mara appeared himself, seated atop a colossal elephant, cloaked in glory. He laughed with disdain. "Who do you think you are?" he asked. "A prince playing holy man. What gives you the right to seek truth? You are alone, no teacher, no witness." Siddhartha looked up, calm and clear. He reached his right hand to touch the earth. And the earth responded. It is said that in that moment, the earth itself bore witness. The ground trembled gently. A breeze swept through the grove. The Bodhi tree's leaves shimmered like stars. The earth, vast and ancient, acknowledged Siddhartha's right to awaken. Mara's elephant stumbled. His illusions cracked. His army scattered like dust in wind. The tempter vanished, and all was still again. But the night was not yet over. With Mara gone, Siddhartha turned inward, deeper than ever before. He saw his past lives, hundreds, thousands, as farmer and king, as bird and beggar, as woman, child, beast, each life carrying joy and sorrow, birth and death. He saw the law of karma, how intentions shaped outcomes, how cruelty echoed, how kindness grew roots across lifetimes. He saw the chain of suffering, ignorance giving rise to craving, craving to clinging, clinging to becoming, becoming to birth, birth to decay and death. He saw that to break the chain, one must see clearly and let go. The dawn approached. The sky shifted from indigo to pale rose. Birds stirred in branches. The river shimmered. And in the first light of that new day, Siddhartha saw it, not as concept, not as hope, but as direct knowing. He saw the four noble truths: that suffering exists, that it arises from craving, that it can end, and that there is a path to its end. He saw the eightfold path unfolding before him like stepping stones across a great river. He saw suffering, and he saw its end. And in that moment, as the sun broke the horizon and the world breathed anew, Siddhartha became the Buddha, the awakened one. He opened his eyes, and the dew on every leaf sparkled with the same truth. Mara had been defeated, not with sword, not with spell, but with stillness, with clarity, with the earth itself as witness. The man who had walked away from gold and pleasure, who had starved beside the river, who had sat unmoved through storm and illusion, had now touched the infinite. And he smiled, not with triumph, but with compassion, because now he would teach, and the world would begin to wake. The wind in Lumbini moved gently, like breath held between two worlds. It was spring, the trees were in bloom, and the sal branches swayed with the weight of 1,000 white blossoms, drifting like snow through sunlight. The grove itself had always been sacred, but on this day it held its breath, because something was about to happen. Queen Maya of Kapilavastu had travelled far. Her time was near, and by custom, she had chosen to give birth in her family's village. The journey had been long, but gentle. Attendants walked quietly beside her. The sky stayed clear, and the earth itself seemed to soften beneath their steps. When they reached Lumbini, Maya smiled. Here, the air was different, cooler, still. The light filtered through the trees in beams so soft they looked like silk. She stepped down from her carriage, removed her sandals, and walked barefoot into the grove. Birds did not flee. They simply paused. At the center of the grove stood a tall sal tree, wide-branched and flowering. She reached for a low branch and rested her hand upon it. She did not cry out. She did not tremble. She breathed. And there, beneath the trees upon the earth in silence, a child was born. He did not enter with a cry. He entered with awareness. His eyes opened wide, dark and deep like the night before rain. His skin was said to shine with a glow not of this world, and the breeze, once soft, began to stir the leaves as if to sing. Attendants rushed forward. The midwife covered her mouth. The sky turned golden for a breath, and legend says that the flowers on the sal tree bent low to witness. The child did not wait to be carried. He stood. He took 7 steps, and with each step, where his foot touched the ground, a lotus bloomed. Not imagined, not metaphor, but real. Petals unfurled beneath his heels. Fragrance filled the air, and the world paused. Animals stopped their grazing, streams paused their song, and even the wind, surprised by the holiness of the moment, turned back to watch. When the 7th step was taken, the boy raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth. And in a voice that was not learned but remembered, he said, "In this life, I am born for the benefit of all beings. This is my final birth. I will put an end to suffering." It is said that the Devas, gods of distant realms, gathered in silence, their hands folded, their eyes lowered, because something rare had occurred. A bodhisattva, fully awakened in past lives, had returned to walk the earth once more. Heavenly flowers fell through the air. Trumpets sounded without instruments. Celestial beings whispered blessings the humans could not hear. And yet even those on earth, who had no names for such wonders, felt the shift. One man wept without knowing why. One horse knelt in its harness. A pot of rice boiled over though no fire was lit. Something had entered the world, something ancient, and entirely new. He was named Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his aim. In his small face, those who looked closely saw both softness and strength, an ocean of stillness behind the movements of a child. He did not laugh more or cry less than other babies, but when he looked into your eyes, it felt as though he saw through the lifetimes you had forgotten. Queen Maya held him close, felt his heartbeat against her own, but in her heart she knew this child did not belong only to her. He belonged to the world. Word of the birth traveled quickly. When the child was only days old, the king summoned the wise sages of the land. Among them came Asita, an old hermit who lived in the mountains, wrapped in robes the color of ash, with eyes that had watched the turning of many seasons. He entered the palace slowly, carried no staff, asked no favor. He only asked to see the child. When Siddhartha was placed before him, Asita's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He bowed low before the infant. And when he rose, he turned to the king. "This child will not rule a kingdom. He will rule the heart. He will not wield armies. He will end suffering. He is destined to become a Buddha, an awakened one. He will show the way beyond sorrow. But I will not live to see his teaching. That is my only sadness." And he bowed once more. The room fell still. Even the oil lamps seemed to lean closer. The king said nothing. The queen held her son more tightly. Maya did not live long after the birth. Some say it was her karma to return to the celestial realm, that to carry a Buddha is to carry a world, and some bodies are made only to hold such grace for a little while. Others say she became his guardian spirit, that she watched from beyond the veil, her presence in every breeze that cooled his fever, every bird that sang outside his window. Siddhartha was raised by her sister. He grew in the lap of comfort. But the memory of the grove, the trees, the moonlit dream, those lived on. Years later, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, he never spoke often of his birth. He taught of suffering, of the path, of breath, of impermanence. But once, when asked what it meant that he had walked on lotus blossoms, he smiled and said, "The path was already beneath me. I did not make it appear. I only stepped where it had always been. Because truth is not invented, it is remembered." Like petals underfoot, waiting to be noticed. And so the child who walked on lotus blossoms became the man who taught others to walk in peace. One step, then another, until suffering too began to bloom into wisdom. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable. A simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble, tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say, "This is who I am." But who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? It is said that after his awakening under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha sat in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because no words could contain what he saw. The world shimmered before him like a dew-covered web catching the morning light. Everything, every leaf, every breath, every thought was connected, not metaphorically, not poetically, but truly. And so, in that first silent gaze, the Avatamsaka Sutra was born, not as speech, but as vision, a vast, radiant vision of interbeing. Imagine this: a net stretches across the cosmos, infinite in all directions. At each knot of the net, there is a jewel, and in each jewel, the entire net is reflected. Every other jewel, every other reflection. No part is separate. No jewel exists on its own. This is Indra's net, one of the core images in the Avatamsaka Sutra. It is not a fantasy. It is how reality is structured. Everything contains everything. You are a jewel in the net. So is the ant beneath your foot. So is the person you haven't forgiven. So is the star pulsing light from 10 billion years ago. Each one reflects all, and when one moves, all are changed. This is not romanticism. It is truth seen from beyond the ego. In the Avatamsaka, it is said that a single moment of insight can contain the entire Dharma, and a single grain of sand can reveal all Buddhas, because nothing is just itself. A drop of water is also the cloud, the river, the ocean, the drought, the cry of thirst, the hand that turns on the tap. All these are not separate events. They are expressions of one great dance. There's a story told from the sutra. The Bodhisattva Sudhana travels in search of awakening. He visits 52 teachers. Each one shows him a different truth. A sailor, a child, a gardener, a courtesan, a beggar, a monk. Not one has the final answer, because in this vision there is no final answer. There is only deepening, broadening, the ever-widening ripple of understanding that you are not apart from anything, not even from the question. In the end, Sudhana meets Samantabhadra, who tells him, the path is infinite, the practice is the vision is you. And in that moment, Sudhana realizes he was never seeking something out there. He was walking through his own reflection. If you truly see this just once, you can never hate again in the same way. Because to harm another is to harm yourself. To lift another is to lift all. You do not have to understand the whole net. You only have to touch one jewel, a single act of kindness, a single moment of stillness, a single breath where you choose love over fear. That one act changes everything, because the net responds, because you are not alone, because no wave rises by itself. Commentary. The Avatamsaka Sutra is sometimes called the flower ornament scripture, because it reveals the beauty of reality as it is, not flat, not linear, but multidimensional, like a lotus unfolding endlessly in every direction. In our daily lives, we feel separate. I am here, you are there, this is mine, that is yours. But this is illusion, a necessary illusion perhaps, but illusion nonetheless. Reality is interpenetration. You are in me, I am in you. Even now, reading these words, Your breath carries the oxygen once exhaled by trees that died 1,000 years ago. Your thoughts are shaped by your grandmother's voice, by books written by strangers, by the laughter of a friend you no longer speak to. Even your loneliness is shared, because someone else right now feels it too. This is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to free you, because when you understand interconnection, you do not have to do everything. You only have to do something and trust that it matters. Because it does. Because the net responds. A Zen teacher once said, "When a bird sings on one branch, the whole forest awakens." You may be that bird. You may be the branch, or the silence that follows. Each one is essential. Each one reflects the whole. You are not small. You are a jewel in the net, reflecting everything, and being reflected by everything. So polish your jewel, not for glory, but for others, because the clearer you become, the clearer the whole web shines. In a bustling monastery near the edge of the forest, there stood a tall wooden ladder. It led nowhere in particular. It was propped against an old stone wall at the edge of the courtyard, half covered in moss, its rungs worn smooth by generations of use. But no one used it for repairs. No one climbed it to reach anything. It was part of a practice, a koan in physical form, a ritual passed down from teacher to student, without ever being fully explained. Each new monk during their first week was asked to climb the ladder. No instructions, no context, just climb. Some did so eagerly. Some hesitated. Some asked, "What's the point?" The elder monks would only smile and say, "You'll see." One by one, the novices ascended. Halfway up, some laughed. Some grew nervous. Some clung tightly and looked down, unsure why they were up there at all. And eventually they came down, some with a shrug, some with a question, some with a strange quiet in their chest. One student, clever and ambitious, asked to climb the ladder a second time. Then a third. He began to climb it every morning, faster each time. He polished the rungs, measured his speed, counted steps. Soon, he believed himself the best climber in the monastery. "Look how steady I am," he told a fellow monk. "Look how others struggle, but I've mastered it." The old teacher heard him, but said nothing. Not yet. Then one foggy morning, the student climbed the ladder again. This time he brought a small bell and rang it proudly at the top, announcing his arrival to the courtyard below. The monks turned, some with amusement, some with discomfort. The old teacher approached and said quietly, "You've climbed very high, but have you noticed? There is nothing up there." The student frowned. "I climbed to improve myself," he said, "to rise above, to be better." The teacher looked at him kindly. "Then you are climbing a ladder of ego, and that ladder goes nowhere." The student froze. He looked down at the mossy stones below, at the monks who stood waiting, not judging. And in that moment, something in him cracked open. The teacher continued. "Each rung you climb thinking it makes you superior is another step away from what you truly are. Real growth does not make you taller than others. It makes you more able to kneel beside them." He descended slowly, for the first time, with no pride in his chest. Just breathe, just stillness. just a strange, welcome sense of returning to earth. This is the parable of the ladder of ego. In life, we often climb. Status, wealth, validation, mastery, spiritual progress, intellect, fame. Each rung promises something. Now I'll be enough. Now they'll respect me. Now I can rest. But at the top, we often find nothing. No summit. No answer. Just more sky. The Buddha warned of this subtle trap. The ego does not always show itself through arrogance. Sometimes it appears as spiritual pride, as goodness that separates, as quiet superiority disguised as humility. True awakening is not a climb, it is a return, a coming back to the place where there is nothing to prove, no one to impress, no summit to reach, only presence, only now. There's an old Zen story. A young man asked a master, "How long until I am enlightened?" The master replied, 10 years. "And if I try very hard?" The student asked. 20, said the master. The harder we climb in pursuit of self, the farther we drift from what is not self. The more we grip the ladder, the more we miss the ground. Commentary: the ladder of ego is invisible, but heavy. It lives in comparison, in judgment, in the quiet belief, I'm a little better than them. Even in spiritual practice, it whispers, look how mindful I am. Look how patient I've become. Look how others still struggle. But real growth is silent. It doesn't need a bell at the top. It rings quietly in the heart and says, let go. You may climb, yes, but ask, why? If the climb brings you closer to compassion, keep going. If it takes you farther from others, come down. Sometimes the real practice is to descend, to sit beside, to listen, to walk with, not above. In the monastery courtyard, the ladder still stands, weathered, unused, but not forgotten. Now, it serves as a reminder, not of reaching, but of returning. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins in the heart of the Himalayan foothills, where the clouds hung low and the trees grew tall enough to brush the sky. There lived an elephant unlike any other. He was large, yes, towering and strong. But it was not his size that set him apart. It was his silence, his gentleness, the way he walked through the forest without disturbing a single leaf. The other animals called him Chadanta, though few ever spoke directly to him. They simply watched, from trees, from burrows, from the safety of shadow, as he moved like a mountain in motion. He was the Buddha in a past life. And this is the story of his strength, not in battle, but in sacrifice. Chadanta lived alone by choice. He did not shun the world, but neither did he cling to it. He bathed in still lakes at sunrise. He ate from the same fig tree each day, taking only what he needed. When storms came, he broke branches to shelter smaller creatures. And when conflict stirred among the animals, he was the one they turned to, not for punishment, but for peace. Yet peace often invites jealousy, and far from the forest, deep within a palace carved of stone and silence, a queen sat with bitterness in her heart. She had once lived in that forest, a doe soft-eyed and quiet, and long ago, when Chadanta had ruled a great elephant herd, she had been among them. She had loved him deeply, without condition, but he had never looked her way, never spoken her name, never returned what she offered. And so, in her next life, reborn as a queen, she remembered only the wound, and she wanted revenge. She summoned the royal hunter and said, "In the northern forest lives a white-tusked elephant. His hide is pale, his eyes are gold. Bring me his tusks, no matter the cost." The hunter hesitated. It is said that he is gentle, wise. "All the more reason," she said, "to prove that the gentle can bleed." And so, with blade and bow, the hunter traveled north, through jungle, through rain, through weeks of silence, until he found the clearing near the fig tree. There stood Chadanta, still, listening to the wind. The hunter watched from behind the trees. He waited 3 days, but the elephant did nothing wrong. He did not rage, did not attack, did not falter. Only once did he cry out, and that was when he helped a small bird fallen from its nest. On the 4th morning, the hunter stepped forward. Chadanta turned, and in that moment he knew. He saw the blade, saw the sorrow, saw the karma rising like fog. And yet, he did not move. "You have come for my tusks," he said. The hunter froze. "How did you—" "I remember," Chadanta said. "She was hurt. She never let it go." The wind stirred the trees. The lake nearby rippled. "I will not fight you," he said. "Take what you came for." The hunter lowered his bow. "But I cannot kill you." "Then don't," said the elephant. "I will kneel. You may take the tusks. Spare the rest." And slowly, with the dignity of one who walks willingly toward pain, Chadanta lowered himself to the earth. The hunter wept as he worked, not because the task was hard, but because the elephant never once flinched. When the blade cut deep, he did not cry out. When the ivory came free, he did not recoil. He only said quietly, "May she find peace now." The hunter carried the tusks back to the palace, and when the queen saw them, gleaming, perfect, wrapped in bloodied cloth, she felt no triumph, only weight. She touched them once, and then began to shake, for in that moment her memories returned fully, not of rejection, but of Chadanta lifting a fallen calf, of standing watch while others slept, of refusing to harm a single creature even when threatened. And now, that being had offered his very body. For her. She collapsed, and in her next life, it is said, she returned to the forest as a healer, not to take tusks, but to mend wounds. The story of Chadanta spread far beyond the forest. Monks carved his image into cave walls. Children whispered his name when they felt afraid, not because he was mighty, but because he proved that strength is not in what you strike, but in what you endure for the sake of others. Because true power needs no roar, it needs no armor. It needs only presence and the willingness to give without hatred, even to those who once wished you harm. There was once a tree that stood just beyond the monastery walls, a tall maple. Its leaves flamed gold each autumn, spilling light into the courtyard like scattered coins. Monks often paused beneath it, bowing to its stillness, especially when the season turned. One afternoon in early autumn, a young novice sat beneath the tree, troubled. His master had given him a koan to meditate on. What do you cling to that no longer lives? He had meditated, chanted, even fasted, but the answer would not come. That day, the wind had begun its long conversation with the branches. A single leaf, amber at the edges, twirled down, landed softly in the novice's lap. He stared at it. Fragile, veined, no longer green, still beautiful, but no longer living. The tree gave no sign of loss. No grief, no clinging, only release. Another leaf drifted down, then another. The novice looked up. The tree was letting go of what had once been its crowning glory. Not with sorrow, but with grace. Later, he spoke with his master. Why does the tree drop what once gave it life? The master replied, because it trusts the cycle. It knows spring will come again. It makes room by releasing. The novice thought of the things he had held too tightly, a grudge from a harsh word, a dream that had withered, an idea of who he should become. He returned to the tree the next day, sat beneath it again. This time, when a leaf fell into his hand, he whispered, "Thank you," and let it go. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Letting go is not loss, it is returning." As the days grew colder, the tree became bare. Some monks said it looked lonely, exposed, but the novice saw strength in that nakedness, a kind of quiet surrender. It was not clinging to what had passed. It was preparing for what would come. Winter arrived. Snow dusted the monastery roofs. The tree stood still, unmoving, uncovered, unconcerned. Months passed, and then, one morning in spring, the novice awoke to find tiny buds on the tree's limbs, software green, new. He smiled and understood at last. What we release returns, but only when we've stopped grasping. There is a phrase in Buddhist teaching, you can't receive with a closed hand. The tree had shown this truth. Letting go is not the end. It is the opening. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, the monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the colour of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. Am I clinging to the Dharma itself? The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveler," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward." The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, 'This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always.' And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down." A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you." Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" "Then rebuild the raft," said the Buddha. "Relearn, begin again, but never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination, it is the guide." A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. "I have crossed," he said softly, and the Buddha replied, "Then walk freely." No further instruction, no ceremony. Just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The river was wide and still, glass-like beneath the pale morning sky. Mist hovered just above the surface, curling and drifting like breath from a sleeping world. A single heron stood motionless at the water's edge, waiting for the ripples to still. On the far bank, the Buddha walked slowly toward the shore. His robe was the color of earth after rain, simple, unstained. In his hand, he carried only his bowl, and in his eyes there was a depth that made even the wind seem to pause. The monks had already gathered beneath the Bodhi trees. Some sat cross-legged on dry leaves. Others stood in quiet reflection, watching the river. Today's teaching would not be long, nor loud, but it would be remembered. The Buddha stepped to the edge of the river and sat upon a low stone. The current moved slowly behind him, and in that quiet, he told a story. There was once a man, he said, who lived by a river much like this one. Every morning he bathed at dawn. Every evening he listened to the wind hum through the reeds. And one day, as he meditated near the shore, he saw a small boat drifting toward him. A few monks turned their heads toward the water as if expecting to see it. The boat was empty, the Buddha continued. No oars, no sail, just a simple wooden vessel carried by the current. The man smiled. There was peace in its stillness. No demands, no conversation, no self to disturb the quiet. But weeks later, the Buddha said, as he sat again near the water, another boat appeared. It drifted toward him, slow, gentle, and quiet as before. He raised his hand slowly, but this time, there was a man in it. The listeners grew still, and as the boat drew closer, it veered slightly, striking the meditating man with a soft bump. The Buddha paused, and the man leapt up, furious. Some of the younger monks blinked. He shouted, the Buddha said. He scolded the other. He demanded to know why he had not steered, why he had disturbed his peace. There was a silence in the air now, a silence of recognition. But when the first boat struck him, when it was empty, he felt no anger. There was no one to blame, no insult to receive, no self to defend. He turned toward the water. Anger arises, he said, when we see another as the cause of our suffering, when we believe we have been wronged, when the self rises to declare, "This should not have happened to me." The monks were very quiet now. "But what if we saw all boats as empty?" he asked. A breeze moved through the tall grasses. Somewhere, a bird called out once, then fell silent again. "When another insults you," the Buddha said, "they too are being carried by a current of pain, confusion, fear, conditioning. Just as the boat was moved by the river, they are moved by the winds of ignorance." He let the words settle. To shout at an empty boat, he said, is to shout at the river, to push the current with your hands, to exhaust yourself against what was never personal. A monk near the front, young, eager, lifted his gaze. His name was Tissa, and he had recently quarreled with another monk over the rules of chanting. "Blessed One," he asked, "but if someone harms us, deliberately, cruelly, is that not different than an empty boat?" The Buddha nodded. "Yes, intention matters, but even those who intend harm are caught in currents they do not fully see." He looked gently at Tissa. The man who lashes out is often protecting a wound. The woman who lies is often afraid. And when you react with anger, you are caught in your own boat, convinced it has a captain, steering by will. A senior monk, older with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, bowed slightly. "I have learned, Lord, to hold my tongue, but the self still burns inside. I smile while feeling the fire of pride, of injury." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then you have seen the fire. That is the first step." He reached down and picked up a small pebble. When a boat is struck, the water ripples, but it returns to stillness if we do not stir it further. He placed the stone down. "Do not pretend there is no fire, but do not feed it. Watch it. Know its shape. See how it arises. And know this: it does not belong to you." The river flowed steadily behind them. A real boat now passed in the distance, its oars dipping quietly, evenly. "You are not the boat," the Buddha said. "You are not the current. You are not even the river." He looked to the horizon where the morning sun had begun to rise. "You are the witness, the space through which all of it flows." A few monks closed their eyes. "To let go of the self is not to disappear," he said. "It is to stop clinging to what is not you, the story, the injury, the name Dot." He drew a shape in the sand beside him, an open circle. When you no longer need to be right, you listen differently. When you no longer need to be seen, you observe. When you let go of I and mine, peace is not something you chase, it is what remains. That night, as the wind cooled and the scent of lotus drifted on the breeze, the monk sat beside the river. Tissa approached the elder monk he had quarreled with, bowed deeply, and said nothing. No apology, no defense, just the stillness of an empty boat. The elder bowed in return, and in that silence, something greater was restored. In the years that followed, the teaching of the empty boat would spread like a soft echo, across rivers, over mountains, into cities and quiet huts. Not as doctrine, but as insight. That much of what we suffer is born from the illusion of a fixed self. That the insult, the injustice, the anger are often just ripples in a river that does not know your name. And when you learn to see each passing vessel as empty, not meaningless but free of blame, then you too can drift more lightly. Letting go, not to vanish, but to float. Still, aware, unmoved by the waves of the world. Like the Buddha that morning by the river, watching everything and holding nothing. A novice had a restless mind. He tried to sit, tried to breathe, tried to still the thoughts, but each time he closed his eyes, his mind swirled. Lists, regrets, what ifs, what nexts. He couldn't find peace, and the more he tried to force stillness, the louder everything seemed to become. One morning, after failing again to meditate, he stood up in frustration. "I'm broken," he muttered. And he walked, head down, steps fast, until he nearly collided with the old groundskeeper, Master Rio. Rio was known for his silence. He didn't teach. He didn't lecture. He just tended the gardens and cleaned the gutters. But he had been at the temple longer than anyone. The novice bowed clumsily. "Forgive me, Master." Rio tilted his head, studying him. "You're not breathing like a monk," he said. The novice looked up, startled. Rio turned, motioning for him to follow. They walked in silence through the bamboo grove to the kitchen courtyard, where a wide clay bowl stood filled with clear water. "Sit," Rio said. The novice sat. Rio picked up a small stick, and without a word, he stirred the water, gently at first, then faster, until the surface churned and the reflection broke into chaos. The novice watched. Then Rio set the stick down. They sat in silence. The bowl shimmered, then slowed, then stilled. The novice could suddenly see his own face again in the reflection. Rio looked at him and asked, "Did I make the water still?" The novice blinked. "Number it settled by itself." Rio nodded. "So will your mind." And he walked away. This is the story of trusting the stillness beneath disturbance. Commentary. Many people believe meditation is about forcing silence, forcing peace, erasing all thought. But in truth, it is about letting the water settle. Your mind is like a bowl of clear water. Every thought, every worry, every fear is like a stick stirring it. The more you react, the more you stir. The more you chase silence, the more turbulence you create. But if you sit and breathe and wait without judgment, the water begins to settle on its own. This is the natural wisdom of the mind. You don't need to fix it. You need to allow it. There's a Zen saying, "Muddy water clears itself if left alone." The novice learned something that day, not from a sutra, not from a formal teaching, but from water. He stopped fighting his thoughts. Instead, he watched them. Like leaves drifting across a pond. He stopped demanding they leave, and instead bowed as they passed. And slowly, something began to shift. Not instantly, but gently, like the bowl that stopped churning the moment no hand stirred it. This is how peace comes. Not by control, not by perfection, but by patience, by the quiet knowing that nothing stirred stays stirred forever. If you are anxious, sit like the bowl. If you are overwhelmed, breathe like the wind that forgets itself. If you are angry, wait like the pond after rain. It will pass, all of it. And when it does, clarity returns. You'll see your reflection again. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't run. So next time you feel lost in thought, don't fix, don't flee, just wait. And let the water be water. There was once a man who lived in poverty. His shoes were worn, his coat threadbare, his belly often empty, and his hands always calloused. But he had a friend, kind and wealthy, who loved him deeply. One day this friend came to visit. They shared a meal, laughed like children, and drank until the poor man fell asleep in contentment. Before leaving, the friend saw how hard the man's life had become. So he quietly took a jewel, a priceless, radiant stone, and stitched it inside the lining of the man's robe. He said nothing. He simply left the gift where it could not be lost. Years passed. The poor man wandered, worked, begged, slept beneath bridges and woke in alleyways. He remained convinced he had nothing, never knowing that a treasure was sewn into his own clothing. He suffered, all while wealth brushed against his ribs, all while forgetting what he already carried. Then one day the two friends met again, and when the rich man saw the state of his companion, he cried out, "Why have you lived this way? Don't you remember? I gave you everything. The jewel has been with you this whole time." The poor man froze. His hands trembled as he turned the robe inside out. And there, nestled in the seam, untouched and waiting, was the jewel. This is a parable from the Lotus Sutra, and it is not about wealth, it is about Buddha nature. It is about the truth we already carry, but forget. The man is all of us, wandering, doubting, working endlessly to find meaning, purpose, belonging, thinking we must earn it, thinking we must seek it, never realizing we were born with the jewel. We never lacked it, we only forgot to look. Buddha nature is not something to gain. It is not granted to the worthy. It is already here, in the one who chants, in the one who steals, in the one who weeps in shame, in the one who laughs too loudly in the back of the zendo. The jewel shines equally. It does not discriminate. In Mahayana Buddhism, this parable is a teaching of Tathagatagarbha, the womb of Buddhahood. It means that all beings, no matter how lost, carry the seed of awakening, not as potential, but as reality. Already whole, already luminous, already stitched into the lining of our very being. The problem is not that we are broken. The problem is that we believe we are broken. And so we search, outside, in teachers, in techniques, in titles, in temporary comforts, all while the jewel sits quietly inside, waiting. There's a saying in Zen, don't seek the truth, only stop cherishing opinions. Because the more we chase, the farther we run from what is already still. In the story, the friend does not blame. He simply says, look. That is the role of the teacher, not to give you the jewel, but to remind you it's there, to show you the thread, to help you turn your robe inside out. Even your flaws are not flaws. They are fabric. Even your pain is not proof of lack. It is the tension in the thread that protects the jewel. Even your delusion is a path, if you let it lead you inward. The poor man's mistake wasn't laziness. It was forgetting his inheritance, just like us. We forget we are enough. We forget we are worthy. We forget that what we seek has always been with us. Buddhism is not about becoming holy. It is about remembering who you are, who you've always been, what cannot be taken from you. Not by grief, not by failure, not by your own darkest thoughts. Sometimes people ask, but if I already have Buddha nature, why practice? And the answer is simple: to remember, to loosen the thread, to notice the glimmer, to stop walking past yourself like a stranger. Commentary: the jewel is not hard to find, but it is easy to overlook, because it does not shout. It does not sparkle in the usual light. It sits in the quietest part of you and waits for you to be still enough to feel it. You may not believe this yet. That's okay. Belief is not required. Only curiosity, only the courage to look inside the robe and ask, what if I am already whole? In a monastery garden, a novice once asked the teacher, "Where can I find the Buddha?" The teacher pointed to the ground. Toes. Then to the novice's chest. Heart. Then to the novice's eyes. Everywhere you see, but especially where you never thought to look. You have the jewel. So now, stop asking how to earn it. Start asking how to honor it. Live from it. Speak from it. Let it shape your steps. And when others forget their own jewels, remind them gently, just like the friend did. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In the town of Rajagaha, nestled among ridges of stone and mist, the streets curled like vines through hills and markets. Every morning, as the sun brushed gold across tiled rooftops, the air came alive with the calls of merchants, the ring of temple bells, and the mingling scents of tamarind, burning incense, and warm, sweet rice. Life here was orderly, rhythmic, a blend of mountain silence and city song. But lately, that rhythm had broken, not from plague, not from drought, but from something deeper, more primal. Fear, not fear of armies or kings, but of a creature, Nalagiri, a bull elephant so massive that earth seemed to lean under his step. Captured from the wild mountains of the north, Nalagiri had been kept in the royal stables since he was young. Once a proud spirit, free to roam cliffs and bathe in wild rivers, now he was shackled day after day, year after year. The weight of captivity grew inside him like fire trapped in stone. He grew restless, then bitter, then dangerous. Stable boys quit, guards were replaced, chains grew thicker. Nalagiri's cries echoed through the stone halls like thunder rolling through empty skies. The people of Rajagaha whispered that madness had taken him, but not all feared him. One man saw an opportunity in that rage. Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, a monk by appearance, but a storm beneath the robes, Jealous of the Buddha's calm, his followers, his truth, Devadatta sought power, not peace. And when his teachings could not rival the Buddha's, he plotted instead. He went to King Ajatashatru, young and proud, his rule still soft around the edges, and he leaned close. "Let Nalagiri loose," he whispered. "Aim him at the Buddha. See what becomes of silent wisdom when tusks meet flesh." The king, tempted by spectacle or swayed by flattery, agreed. And so, one morning, before the city had fully woken, the iron gate to Nalagiri's pen creaked open. Chains were undone. Commands were given. The path was cleared. Nalagiri stepped forward, eyes wide, breath steaming, mind ablaze. He charged through market streets, through cloth stalls and fruit carts, scattering baskets and lives. People screamed, children ran, dogs howled and carts overturned. He did not walk. He tore the world open beneath him. And down that path, barefoot, cloaked in saffron robes, carrying only his arm's bowl, walked the Buddha. No guards, no weapons, no rush in his step, just presence. His disciples shouted from behind walls and corners, "Lord, turn back, the elephant comes, he will crush you." But the Buddha kept walking, not with recklessness, not with pride, but with compassion so still it could hold a mountain. As Nalagiri approached, the air thickened with heat and tension. His tusks gleamed, his trunk coiled like a whip. His roar shattered the morning hush. Mothers shielded their children, merchants fell to the ground. The entire city held its breath, but the Buddha stood. The elephant thundered toward him. The ground trembled, and then stillness. The Buddha raised his eyes and looked. He looked not at a beast, not at a weapon, but at a being in pain. He saw the chains, the years, the sorrow turned to rage. He saw the hunger for freedom twisted into madness. He saw a heart once wild, now broken by cruelty. And in his gaze, he held no fear, no judgment, only recognition. As Nalagiri neared, mere strides away from trampling the man before him, he met that gaze, and something changed. The wind quieted, the air cooled. The fire in Nalagiri's eyes flickered. He slowed, then paused. His ears twitched, his breathing hitched. He took one more step, then stopped. The Buddha stepped forward. Slowly, gently, one hand raised, not to strike, not to shield, but to bless. And Nalagiri knelt. He folded his legs beneath him, lowered his head like a branch under rain. A great groan, half sigh, half sorrow, escaped his chest. And there, in the middle of the street where rage had once ruled, the Buddha placed his hand on Nalagiri's brow. Not with domination, but with presence. And the elephant wept. Tears pooled beneath his eyes, streaking down the folds of his face, darkening the dust. His trunk coiled softly around the Buddha's arm, no longer as a weapon, but as a gesture of surrender. The city watched in stunned silence. The same elephant who shattered stone fences and snapped trees now sat like a disciple at the feet of peace. Devadatta, watching from the shadows of a colonnade, said nothing. His plot, like a snake uncoiled, had slithered away, not with defeat by force, but by a truth too gentle to resist. Later, When the sun rose fully and the city slowly exhaled, Nalagiri returned to the royal grounds, but no longer was he led by whip or chain. He walked slowly, willingly, like a monk returning from alms. The Buddha returned to his seat beneath a banyan tree, his bowl untouched, his robe still bright. And the people came. They came not to celebrate a miracle, but to understand a lesson. They asked, "How did you stop him?" And the Buddha replied, "Anger cannot be conquered by anger, but by love alone. Fear cannot be silenced by force, but by understanding. The wildness in others is often the cry of suffering, not wickedness." And so it was taught that true strength is not in the fist, not in the sword, but in the heart that stays open in the face of danger. The tale of Nalagiri passed from lips to scrolls, from scrolls to temples, from temples to time itself. Children would ask their mothers, "Is it true that the Buddha tamed the elephant?" And they would answer, "Yes, my child, but not with magic, with seeing. Seeing the pain in others, seeing the fear beneath fury, seeing the being behind the mask, and meeting it with love." Nalagiri lived out his days not as a beast of burden, but as a gentle giant, offering rides to children, watering temple gardens with his trunk, and standing calmly when the monks recited sutras beneath the trees. It is said that when he died, the earth grieved gently, and his spirit rose unchained. Some believe Nalagiri was reborn in a heavenly realm. Others say he was reborn among the disciples. But all agree on this, that in the still gaze of one awakened man, an ocean of rage was calmed. Not by war, but by peace itself. The forest was silent. A slow dawn brushed the canopy with gold, and the earth exhaled the cool breath of night. Beneath the tall trees, a single figure sat unmoving, his presence vast, his stillness deeper than the roots below him. This was Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of great action. Where Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world, Samantabhadra responds, not just with compassion, but with commitment, with vow, with doing. In Sanskrit, his name means universal worthy. He is the embodiment of enlightened action, not theoretical, but lived. In temples across East Asia, he is depicted riding a white elephant with 6 tusks, each representing one of the 6 paramitas, perfections of a bodhisattva: generosity, discipline, patience, vigor, meditation, wisdom. The elephant is steady, strong, humble. It does not race. It carries, because the path of action is not haste. It is devotion. Samantabhadra is not remembered for miracles. He is remembered for vows. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, a vision of infinite Buddhas and worlds, he stands before countless beings and declares, "I vow to honor all Buddhas, to make offerings, to confess mistakes, to rejoice in goodness, to request teaching, to stay in the world, to follow the path, to live for others, to turn the wheel of Dharma, to dedicate all merit for the awakening of all beings." 10 vast vows, 10 immeasurable currents of action. And still, he made more, because Samantabhadra's compassion does not stop at feeling, it becomes form. There's a story told in the mountains of Sichuan. A wandering monk came to a temple where the image of Samantabhadra stood tall, ornate, golden, seated atop the elephant. The monk bowed, then whispered, "Great Bodhisattva, what is your practice?" And in his mind, a voice replied, "Whatever brings benefit, I do it." The monk frowned. "But how do I know what will help?" The voice was soft. "When your mind forgets the self, every step becomes service." This is the heart of Samantabhadra, not just knowing what is good, but doing it, even when tired, even when no one sees, even when the benefit is invisible. Some bodhisattvas sit in meditation, others speak sutras. Samantabhadra cleans the floor, carries the sick, plants trees he will never see grow, because his practice is not abstract. It is bodily, it is effort, and it is choice. In the West, we often associate wisdom with silence, stillness, detachment. But Mahayana Buddhism offers a different view. That wisdom and action are not separate. That the awakened mind moves, not compulsively, but naturally, like water down a mountain. Samantabhadra teaches, if you bow, bow completely. If you eat, eat with gratitude. If you work, work with your whole body. If you vow, live the vow. A novice once asked a Zen master, "What is the most advanced form of practice?" The master pointed to the broom, then to the rice pot, then to the novice's own worn sandals. "Whatever needs doing," he said, "do it completely." In this way, Samantabhadra is not lofty. He is practical. He does not ask you to fly. He asks you to stay grounded and keep going, to help even one being, to smile even once for someone who is suffering, to remember that in a single action, sweeping, bowing, cooking, there can be immeasurable merit when done with a mind of service. There's a teaching. A bodhisattva never asks, "Will this be noticed?" A bodhisattva asks, "Does this help?" In modern life, we are busy. We're taught to measure action by its results, but Samantabhadra teaches boundless action, where the result is not yours to keep, where the act itself is enough, where planting a seed you'll never see flower is not foolish, it is sacred. Commentary. Samantabhadra is not a figure on a pedestal. He is a mirror. He shows us that enlightenment is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it, fully awake, with sleeves rolled, with hands open, with vows not recited but lived. The white elephant is not fast, but it is strong. It does not seek applause. It just walks, one foot after the other, one act after the next, and the bodhisattva upon it smiles. Because every breath is part of the vow. To follow Samantabhadra is not to be perfect. It is to be willing, to step forward, to show up, to fall down and vow again. Because the path is long, but every step walked in service becomes joy. Long ago, in a kingdom ringed by mountains and temples, a mighty king ruled from a palace of stone and gold. He was feared by his enemies, praised by poets, and followed by thousands. His armies stretched across the land. His wealth filled entire chambers, and his commands echoed through cities like thunder. But still, he was restless. Victory brought no peace. Praise faded quickly. Even sleep, wrapped in silk and guarded by soldiers, felt hollow. And so one morning, while gazing out across his kingdom from a marble balcony, the king spoke aloud. Who in this world is greater than I? A servant, sweeping quietly nearby, paused. There is one, he said softly, eyes downcast. The king turned sharply. Who? A sage, said the servant. He lives alone in the forest, wears no crown, owns no gold. But they say he holds more peace in his silence than all your generals in battle. The king laughed. A beggar in the woods, greater than me. But something in the servant's voice lingered. And later that night, when the court had gone quiet, the king summoned his best horse and rode out alone, disguised in simple robes, his face shadowed by the hood of a traveller. He rode for 2 days, through thick jungle, across rivers, past farmers and monks and children who did not bow. Finally, at the edge of a still grove, he saw a small hut beneath a Bodhi tree, and outside it, seated cross-legged on a flat stone, was the sage. No guards, no roof over his head, no possessions, just stillness and eyes that did not flicker when the king approached. You are the one they speak of? The king asked. The sage nodded once. I am one, of many. The king studied him. You have no palace, no army, no throne, and yet people speak your name in reverence. Why? The sage said nothing. The silence stretched, long enough for the king to feel his own voice echo. Finally, the sage opened his palm and motioned for the king to sit. The king hesitated, then obeyed. They sat together under the tree, as the wind moved gently through the leaves. No words, no commands, just presence. After a long while, the king said, You are not afraid of me. I see no king, said the sage, only a man with questions. The king frowned. I have conquered lands, broken enemies, shaped history. You think I have questions? The sage met his eyes. Then why are you here? The king opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. Because beneath the silk, beneath the crowns, beneath the noise, he had come not to test the sage, but to understand something he could not command. Finally, he asked, Why do people follow you? I do not ask them to. Then why do they listen? The sage picked up a small stone from the earth, rolled it in his fingers. They listen, he said, because I have no need for them to. The king blinked. I lead armies, command cities, hold power over life and death, but still I'm not content. The sage nodded. Because you mistake fear for respect, obedience for love, wealth for worth. The king stiffened. Are you saying I am not powerful? I am saying, the sage said gently, that true power does not cling, it does not shout, it does not fear being forgotten. They sat again in silence. The wind stirred the sage's robe. The king looked down at his hands. I have everything, he said, but still I feel empty. The sage smiled. Then you are ready. Ready for what? To lead without needing to be above. That evening, the king returned to his palace. No fanfare, no declaration, but something had changed. He began to listen more, to speak less, to ask questions instead of giving orders. His advisors whispered about his visits to temples, his long walks alone, his sudden interest in sitting beneath trees without speaking. And when his generals asked, "Who taught you this?" he said simply, "A man with nothing, who showed me everything." Years later, when the sage passed into silence beneath the same Bodhi tree, the king declared a day of stillness across the land. No work, no speech, just listening. And in time, his own rule became a story of its own, not because he expanded borders, but because he stopped needing to, not because he gained more, but because he learned to let go. And the story of the king and the sage spread like the breeze that once moved through the forest leaves. A reminder that the crown is not the source of power, wisdom is, and the one who does not seek to rule is often the one most worthy to lead. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. It was night when the master pointed. The moon hung low over the monastery roof, pale and full, casting silver light across the silent garden. A group of monks stood beside him, robes drawn tight against the wind. The master raised his hand and extended one finger toward the sky. "See that?" he said. The students nodded. "The moon." He shook his head. "Number that is the finger." Then he smiled softly. "And what it points to is the moon." The monks stood still, unsure. The wind moved the trees. The master lowered his hand and whispered, "Don't mistake the finger for the moon." This is one of the most repeated teachings in Zen, because the mind is hungry for signs, hungry for symbols, hungry for teachers, for teachings, for shapes and systems. It sees the finger and calls it truth, but the finger is just pointing. It is not the truth itself. Imagine you're lost in the forest. A guide lifts a lantern. You follow the light, but mistake the lantern for the destination. You begin polishing it, worshipping it, writing poems about its handle and flame. But you never leave the forest, because the lantern was not meant to be your home. It was meant to show you the path. That's what Zen does. It points, but if you hold too tightly to the pointing, you never arrive. Buddha's words, the sutras, the rituals, even meditation, they are fingers. Beautiful, wise, luminous fingers. But if you cling to them, if you name them truth, you stop short of the moon. A monk once asked his teacher, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" The teacher held up a flower, just a flower. The monk bowed. He understood, because the flower was not the answer. It was the invitation to stop asking, to just see, to be. There's a story of a man crossing a river. The bridge is narrow, the current strong. Halfway across, he freezes, looks down at the water and panics. He shouts to a traveler behind him, "Help me understand this bridge." The traveler laughs gently. "You don't need to understand it," he says. "Just walk." Zen does not fear the unknown. It welcomes it, because the unknown is where truth lives. Not in definitions, but in direct experience. Not in the finger, but in the sky beyond it. Many people come to Zen hoping for words that explain, but the moment something is explained, it is no longer what it was. It becomes a concept, a mental model, and reality, true, breathing, silent reality, evaporates behind the map. Once, a young monk read every sutra he could find. He could recite the Eightfold Path, the 5 aggregates, the 4 Noble Truths. He knew Sanskrit terms. He quoted the Buddha with reverence. But he was restless. He asked his teacher, "Why do I still feel distant from awakening?" The teacher smiled and walked him outside. The moon was rising. The teacher pointed. The student followed the finger. "See it?" the teacher asked. "Yes," the monk said. "The moon." The teacher chuckled. "Number, that's still my finger." The monk blinked, and then, like a soft breeze over water, he understood. To point is not to possess. To teach is not to trap. Even the Buddha said, "My teachings are like a raft, meant to cross the river, not to carry on your back once you reach the shore." But many cling to the raft. They decorate it, argue over whose raft is best, then forget to cross. The finger and the moon, words and truth, map and terrain. All teachings are like this. Zen does not dismiss the finger, but it urges you not to stop there. Because no teacher can give you the moon. They can only point. The rest is silence, attention, direct seeing, commentary. This koan is not just about Zen. It is about how we relate to everything. A lover says, "I love you," and we cling to the phrase, replaying it in our minds. But the real love was in the look, in the moment, in the breath before the words. The words were the finger, the love was the moon. We read books about mindfulness, but forget to be mindful. We quote wise sayings, but live unawake. We chase spiritual techniques, but miss the moment itself. The way the light falls through leaves, the sound of tea being poured, the feel of wind on bare skin. These are the moon, director. Immediate, alive. When you sit in meditation, thoughts will rise. Names, labels, questions. That's the finger, let it point. But keep looking beyond, to what has no name. No answer, only presence, only this, only now. If you walk away with only the finger, you miss everything. But if you let it lead you, quietly, gently, without clinging, you may one day look up and find yourself under the full moon, smiling, and no longer needing to explain why. The tree stood at the edge of the world. Its roots gripped the earth like memory. Its branches reached toward the sky like longing, and beneath it sat a man, still as a mountain, breathing, watching, waiting. His name had once been Siddhartha, but that name now lay behind him, like a robe folded and left at the forest's edge. He had left palaces, left hunger, left both indulgence and denial. And now, with the moon rising above the horizon and the world softening into dusk, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, not in search, but in surrender. His legs were crossed, his hands rested lightly in his lap. The breath moved through him like wind through reeds, slow, even, empty of grasping. He had made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I see clearly, until I find the end of suffering. And so the night began. The stars emerged like scattered seeds across the dark. The forest exhaled. Animals stirred. The air cooled. Siddhartha's mind turned inward, like a lamp flame drawing into itself. He began to see, not with eyes, but with knowing. Visions came, clear. unforced. As if someone were whispering his past to him, life by life. He saw himself born in countless forms, as man, as woman, as child, as beast, as merchant, as slave, as prince, as pauper, each life blooming and withering, each desire rising and fading, each birth followed by loss. He saw himself die 1,000 deaths, not with fear, but with clarity, and for the first time he understood. The self is not fixed. It moves, it changes, it clings, it returns. He watched the thread of his existence unspool across time, and yet something beyond the thread remained still. He did not speak, he did not stir, but inside him, a door creaked open, and he stepped through. Midnight deepened. The forest held its breath. The moon climbed higher, softening the world in silver. Now he turned his gaze outward, not with judgment, but with compassion. He saw the lives of others, their births and deaths, their joys and sorrows, rising and falling like waves. He saw kings and criminals, lovers and thieves, monks and warriors, all bound by the same law, karma, intentions like seeds, actions like water, and from them the fruits of joy or suffering. He saw that no life stood alone. Each was a thread in a vast net. Each thought, each choice, each word sent ripples outward, reaching far beyond the speaker, the thinker, the doer. He saw how hatred returned as hatred, how greed bore more hunger, how ignorance looped endlessly like a wheel spinning in sand. And he saw too how kindness softened sorrow, how generosity opened hearts, how truth, spoken gently, could shatter lifetimes of illusion. And still, he sat, breathing, watching. The net of becoming stretched before him, vast, intricate, impossible to escape. Unless one saw the threads for what they were, not chains, but illusions. He closed his eyes, and the world began to tremble. The deepest hour of night, not even owls cried now, not even leaves moved, and within him, the final door unlocked. He turned his mind to the cause of suffering. Why do we suffer? Why do we cling? Why do we fear? And the answer rose, not like thunder, but like morning, clear, simple, radiant. He saw it all in a single breath. Ignorance gives rise to craving. Craving gives rise to clinging. Clinging leads to becoming. Becoming to birth. Birth to sorrow, decay, and death. And so the wheel turns. Again and again. But he also saw how it could be stopped. Not with violence, not with denial, but with clarity. With the eightfold path. Like stepping stones across a great river. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He saw that suffering was not a punishment, nor a curse, nor a mystery. It was a path, and paths could be walked, and walked until they ended. And as the final shadow lifted from his mind, as the first bird stirred in the distant branches, it happened, not a flash, not a voice, not a miracle, but a knowing, a deep, still knowing. He had awoken. The sun crested the hills, slow and golden. The mist curled like incense through the trees. And Siddhartha, now the Buddha, opened his eyes. He looked out over the world, not with desire, not with fear, but with compassion so vast it had no name. He saw children born into love and hunger. He saw soldiers sharpening swords. He saw merchants counting coins. He saw mothers weeping over small graves. And he wept, not with sadness, but with tenderness, because they were all still sleeping, not foolish, not broken, just dreaming. He had been asleep once too, and now he was awake. It is said that Mara, the Lord of Illusion, came one last time, not with armies, not with demons, but with a whisper. Now that you are free, he said, leave them behind. They will not understand. They will mock you. They will twist your words. They will forget. And the Buddha listened. He sat with that thought, the thought of peace in solitude, of disappearing into the forest, of vanishing beyond suffering alone. But then he saw a farmer rising to begin the day. He saw a child carrying water. He saw a girl humming a tune she did not know was ancient. And he knew they were not lost, just tired, just waiting, just needing someone to show them the way back to themselves. So he turned to Mara and said, "They will understand. Some will. Even one is enough." And Mara vanished. He stood slowly, the grass beneath him still wet with dew. His knees ached, but his heart did not. He took his bowl, his robe, his breath, and began to walk toward the village, toward the people, toward the long road of teaching. He would speak not of gods, nor of punishments, nor of sacred fire, but of suffering, and how to end it, of breath, and how to follow it, of kindness, and how to live it. And so the man who once left his son sleeping, who had starved beneath trees, who had faced demons and silence and the unraveling of self, walked down from the Bodhi tree. And the world, though it did not know it yet, had already begun to wake. Because one man had seen clearly, had sat still, had not run, and had touched the truth. And from that stillness, a path was born for all the world to walk. There was a spider who spun her web in the rafters of the meditation hall. No one noticed her at first. She was small, thin-legged, her thread finer than the morning mist. But slowly as the days passed, her web grew, spanning beam to beam. A fragile bridge suspended in stillness. A young monk sweeping the floors one morning looked up. He paused. Something about the web held him. It glimmered faintly in the dawn light, each thread stretching toward another as if in quiet conversation. He brought his discovery to the abbot. "Should I remove it?" he asked. "It doesn't belong in the hall." The abbot looked up, tilted his head, smiled. "She belongs exactly where she is," he said, "and perhaps she's teaching more than we are." From that day forward, the monks left the web untouched. They meditated beneath it, bowed in its presence, watched as dew sometimes gathered along its strands, like pearls of stillness. One day, the young monk saw a tiny gnat caught in the web. He felt a pang of sorrow, moved closer, but before he could act, the spider emerged, wrapped the insect, and retreated. He asked the abbot again, "How can something so beautiful cause harm?" The abbot nodded slowly. A web is not cruel, he said. It is simply a truth. He continued, connection is not always comfort, but everything touches everything else. He gestured around the hall. You see walls, mats, windows, candles, but they are not separate. He pointed up. That spider reminds us. One thread trembles, and the whole web feels it. The monk began to notice more. How a sharp word at breakfast changed the tone of the morning. How a kind gesture rippled through the day. How his own thoughts, when tangled, echoed outward into others. One evening during Zazen, a gust of wind slipped through the shutters. The spider's web quivered, and every monk in the room turned slightly. Not toward the wind, but toward the movement of the web, as if they all felt it at once. There is a teaching in the Avatamsaka Sutra. In the realm of Indra's net, each jewel reflects all others. To touch one is to touch the whole. The spider did not preach. She simply spun, her work invisible until noticed, and then unforgettable. Months later, the web collapsed in a storm. Gone, no trace. But the young monk no longer looked for it above. He had begun to see the web everywhere, in the way the cook's ladle touched the soup pot, in the way the bell echoed down the hallway, in the way a smile from a stranger reached deep into his chest. Everything, connected, everything, touching, nothing, alone. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.